Imagine a killer who travels thousands of miles just to commit a murder, with no victim in mind. A killer who meticulously buries kill kits all across the country, years in advance, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This isn't a character from a horror movie. This is the true story of Israel Keyes, one of the most organized and terrifying serial killers in American history. For years, Keyes lived a double life. To his friends and family in Anchorage, Alaska, he was a quiet, hard-working construction worker and a devoted father. But beneath this ordinary facade was a monster who crisscrossed the United States, hunting and killing for the sheer thrill of it. Unlike other serial killers, who often have a specific victim type or a preferred hunting ground, Keyes was completely random. This randomness is what made him so difficult to catch and so incredibly frightening. His method was disturbingly simple, yet effective. He would fly to a city, rent a car, and drive hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles, to another location. There, he'd dig up a pre-stashed kit containing weapons, zip ties, and tools for body disposal. He would then target anyone who crossed his path: a couple in a parked car, a person jogging on a trail, or someone alone in their home. His victims were chosen by chance, their only misfortune being in the wrong place at the wrong time. One of his most well-known crimes was the abduction and murder of 18-year-old Samantha Koenig in Anchorage in 2012. Keyes kidnapped her from the coffee stand where she worked, took her to a shed, and assaulted her before taking her life. What he did next was particularly gruesome. He left her body in the shed, flew to New Orleans for a 2-week cruise with his family, and then returned. Upon his return, he staged her body with an old newspaper to make it seem like she was alive, all to extort a ransom from her family. This chilling act showed his complete lack of empathy and his cold, calculating nature. The ransom demand was his undoing. After the money was deposited, Keyes began using the victim's debit card at ATM. This created a digital trail that law enforcement could finally follow. He was tracked from Alaska to Arizona, New Mexico, and finally to Texas, where he was pulled over in a parking lot for a minor traffic violation and arrested. The police had no idea they had just caught one of the most prolific serial killers the country had ever seen. In custody, Keyes began a series of chilling interviews with the FBI. He played a twisted game with investigators, slowly revealing details of his crimes but always controlling the narrative. He would trade information for concessions, like a cup of coffee or a cigar. He confessed to killing Samantha Koenig and also admitted to the 2011 murder of Bill and Lorraine Carrier in Essex, Vermont. He broke into their home, tied them up, drove them to an abandoned farmhouse, and ended their lives. Their bodies have never been found. Keyes claimed he had killed at least 11 people, but investigators believe the true number could be much higher. He hinted at victims in Washington State, New York, and possibly even in other countries. He spoke of his crimes with a detached, almost bored tone, describing the acts in horrifying detail without a hint of remorse. He told investigators he enjoyed what he did, that he got a thrill from the power he held over his victims. He said he chose this path as early as his teenage years, first by breaking into homes, then escalating to arson, and finally to murder. He had a set of self-imposed rules. He avoided killing in his home state of Alaska until the very end. He avoided killing people he knew. He used cash for all his travel to avoid a paper trail. He buried his kill kits years in advance, sometimes in places he wouldn't return to for a decade. These kits were 5-gallon buckets filled with everything he'd need: guns, silencers, ammunition, zip ties, and Drono to help decompose the bodies. The level of planning and patience was unlike anything investigators had encountered before. One of the most disturbing aspects of Israel Keyes' story is how many questions remain unanswered. before he could be brought to trial, and before he revealed the identities of all his victims, Keyes took his own life in his jail cell in December 2012. He left behind a cryptic, blood-soaked note filled with dark poetry and drawings of skulls, but no names. He took his secrets to the grave, leaving countless families without closure and law enforcement with a puzzle that may never be fully solved. The case of Israel Keyes serves as a stark reminder that evil can wear the most ordinary of masks. He wasn't a stereotypical monster lurking in the shadows. He was a neighbor, a father, a businessman. He was able to blend into society so perfectly while hiding a secret life of unimaginable violence. His story forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that we may never truly know the people around us. How many other Israel Keyeses are out there, living seemingly normal lives, their kill kits buried and waiting? It's a terrifying thought. The randomness, the planning, and the sheer cruelty of his crimes make Israel Keyes a unique and haunting figure in the annals of true crime. His legacy is one of pain, mystery, and the chilling knowledge that sometimes the greatest danger is the one you never see coming. Have you ever wondered what secrets might be hiding behind the perfect facade of your neighbor's life? Imagine a successful businessman, a devoted husband and father, living in a sprawling, multi-million-dollar estate. This is the story of Herb Baumeister, a man who seemed to have it all, but harbored a secret so dark it would shatter his community and shock the nation. Herb Baumeister lived with his wife Julie and their 3 children on a beautiful 18-acre property in Indiana called Fox Hollow Farm. He was the founder of the successful Save-A-Lot thrift store chain, a well-known figure in his local business community. From the outside, the Baumeisters were the picture of the American dream. But beneath the surface, a terrifying reality was unfolding. It all started in the early 1990s, when young men began disappearing from the gay bars in Indianapolis. The police were baffled. These men were vanishing without a trace, their families left with nothing but questions and heartbreak. For years, the cases went cold. The disappearances mounted, creating a cloud of fear over the city's nightlife. No one could have imagined the connection between these missing men and the idyllic suburban estate of Herb Baumeister. The first crack in Herb's perfect life appeared not from a police investigation, but from his own son. While playing in the woods of Fox Hollow Farm, his son discovered a human skull. When he showed it to his mother, Julie, Herb explained it away. He claimed it was part of his late father's medical skeleton collection. It was a strange explanation, but at the time, Julie accepted it, perhaps not wanting to believe anything more sinister. But this was just the beginning of the gruesome discoveries at Fox Hollow. As time went on, the marriage between Herb and Julie grew strained. Herb's behavior became more erratic. Julie would later describe him as having a dual personality, swinging between a loving family man and a deeply troubled individual. The financial pressures from his struggling business only made things worse. During this period, Julie strictly forbade Herb from having guests over while she and the children were away on vacation. He didn't listen. The real breakthrough in the case came from a man named Tony Harris. Harris told investigators a chilling story. He claimed he had met a man calling himself Brian Smart at a bar, who took him back to a magnificent home with a swimming pool. This Brian Smart was, in fact, Herb Baumeister. At the house, things took a terrifying turn. During a seemingly innocent swimming session, Baumeister attempted to strangle Harris with a pool hose. Harris, a strong individual, fought back and managed to escape with his life. He was one of the lucky few. Harris's testimony was the key police needed. He not only provided a detailed description of Baumeister, but also remembered the license plate number of his car. The police ran the plates, and the name that came back was Herbert Baumeister, owner of Fox Hollow Farm. Suddenly, the scattered puzzle pieces began to fit together. Investigators approached Julie Baumeister. Initially, she was defensive of her husband and refused to allow a search of the property. But, as the evidence mounted and her own suspicions grew, she began to see the horrifying truth. Her perfect life was a carefully constructed lie. While she was away with the children, her husband had been luring men back to their home with deadly intentions. In June of 1996, with Herb out of town on business, a distraught Julie finally gave police the consent they needed to search Fox Hollow Farm. What they found was a scene of unimaginable horror. The sprawling 18-acre property was a clandestine graveyard. As investigators began to excavate the wooded areas, they unearthed thousands of charred and crushed bone fragments. These remains were scattered across the estate, mixed with dirt and leaves. The scale of the discovery was staggering. Forensic anthropologists were called in to sift through the earth. They painstakingly pieced together the fragments, eventually identifying the remains of at least 11 men. Most were the same young men who had vanished from Indianapolis years before. The authorities now believed they had found the hunting ground of a prolific serial killer. As the news broke and his world crumbled, Herb Baumeister fled. He traveled to Ontario, Canada, escaping the investigators who were closing in on him. The man who had built a life on deception and violence was now a fugitive. But his run from justice was short-lived. Days after the search began at his home, Herb Baumeister checked into a motel. There, he wrote a 3-page letter. In it, he didn't confess to the murders. Instead, he wrote about his failing business and his broken marriage, painting himself as a victim of circumstance. Then, he took his own life. He left behind a legacy of pain and 1,000 unanswered questions. With Baumeister dead, a full confession was impossible. Investigators had to rely on the evidence they had. They believe his method was to meet men at bars, bring them back to Fox Hollow Farm, incapacitate them, and then murder them. He would then dispose of their bodies on his property. The swimming pool, a symbol of suburban leisure, had been his primary tool. Even after his death, the dark story of Herb Baumeister continued to unfold. Investigators began to suspect that the bodies found at Fox Hollow Farm were not his only victims. They looked into another series of unsolved murders from the 1980s. Along the I-70 highway corridor, which runs through Indiana and Ohio, several young men fitting a similar profile had been found strangled. Baumeister had been traveling this route extensively for his business during that time. While the connection has never been definitively proven, many investigators believe that Herb Baumeister, the so-called I-70 strangler, could be responsible for at least 9 more deaths. The total number of Herb Baumeister's victims may never be truly known. The bone fragments at Fox Hollow were so extensively damaged that it is possible some victims will remain unidentified forever. His story serves as a chilling reminder that evil can wear the most ordinary of faces. He was a neighbor, a father, a businessman. But he was also a monster, hiding in plain sight. Fox Hollow Farm, once a symbol of success and happiness, is now forever stained by the horrific acts that took place there. A silent testament to the dark secrets one man took to his grave. Picture this, a quiet suburban neighborhood in the 1970s. Kids are riding their bikes, sprinklers are watering lawns, and families feel safe behind their locked doors. But what they don't know is that a monster is walking among them. A monster who wears a police uniform by day and becomes a terrifying predator by night. This isn't the plot of a horror movie. It's the true story of Joseph D'Angelo, the man who would become known as the Golden State Killer. For over a decade, a shadow of fear stretched across California. It began with a series of burglaries, but soon escalated into something far more sinister. The attacker, known by many names like the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker, was methodical, cruel, and seemingly unstoppable. He would stalk his victims, learning their routines, their habits, the layout of their homes. He'd break in, often while they were asleep, and subject them to hours of terror. His methods were chillingly precise. He would bind his victims, often using shoelaces he found in their own homes. He'd stack dishes on the back of the male victim, threatening to kill everyone if he heard the plates rattle. This psychological torment was a signature part of his attacks. He wanted not just to assault, but to completely dominate and instill a level of fear that would haunt his victims for the rest of their lives. But the horror didn't stop there. As his reign of terror continued, the attacks became more violent. The burglaries and assaults escalated into murder. The first confirmed murder linked to him occurred in 1978. Brian and Katie Majori were walking their dog in Rancho Cordova when they were chased down and shot to death. They had seemingly stumbled upon him, and for that, they paid with their lives. Their murder marked a horrifying turning point. The East Area Rapist was now a killer. After this, the attacks moved south to Southern California. The pattern changed slightly, but the brutality remained. He would now target couples, breaking into their homes, tying them up, and then he would bludgeon them to death. Lyman and Charlene Smith in Ventura County, Keith and Patrice Harrington in Orange County, Manuela Withen, Sherry Domingo and Gregory Sanchez, all murdered in their own homes, their sanctuary turned into a crime scene. The fear was palpable. People bought guns, installed new locks, and slept in shifts. But the killer was a ghost. He left behind few clues, and the DNA technology of the time wasn't advanced enough to identify him. For years, the cases went cold. The trail vanished. It seemed the Golden State Killer had disappeared, leaving a scar of unsolved murders across the state. Decades passed. Victims grew older, investigators retired, and the files collected dust. It felt like justice would never come. But then, everything changed. A new tool emerged that the killer could never have anticipated: investigative genetic genealogy. In the 2010s, detectives, led by the relentless efforts of investigators like Paul Holes and crime writer Michelle McNamara, who tragically passed away while writing her book on the case, decided to try a new approach. They took the killer's DNA from old crime scenes and uploaded it to public genealogy websites, the kind people use to build their family trees. They were looking for a relative, a distant cousin, anyone who shared DNA with the Phantom Killer. After months of painstaking work, sifting through complex family trees, they found a match. The genetic trail led them to an elderly man living a quiet life in a Sacramento suburb. He was a grandfather, a former police officer, a man his neighbors described as odd. Sometimes prone to angry outbursts, but ultimately harmless. His name was Joseph James D'Angelo. Could this really be him? The man who had terrorized a state for over a decade. Police began surveillance. They collected his DNA from a tissue he'd discarded in a trash can outside a Hobby Lobby. They took it to the lab, and the results were undeniable. It was a perfect match. The DNA of the quiet grandfather was the same DNA left at dozens of crime scenes decades earlier. The ghost had a face. The monster had a name. In April 2018, nearly 44 years after his first known crime, police descended on Joseph D'Angelo's home. As they arrested the 72-year-old man, a neighbor's camera captured him, looking frail and confused. It was a surreal sight. This was the man who had climbed through windows, whispered threats in the dark, and taken at least 13 lives. The phantom who had haunted the nightmares of so many was just an old man in a bathrobe. D'Angelo's life had been a masterclass in deception. He had served in the Navy during the Vietnam War. He became a police officer in the towns of Exeter and Auburn in the 1970s, the very time he was committing some of his most heinous crimes. He was even fired from the Auburn Police Department for shoplifting a can of dog repellent and a hammer, a chilling detail. Considering the tools of his crimes, he then worked as a truck mechanic for decades, living a seemingly normal life with a wife and children, all while hiding his monstrous secret. In 2020, to avoid the death penalty, Joseph D'Angelo pleaded guilty to 13 counts of first-degree murder and admitted to dozens of other crimes for which the statute of limitations had expired. During the sentencing hearing, victims and their family members finally had the chance to face him in court. For days, they read impact statements, their voices filled with pain, anger, and resilience. They recounted the horror he had inflicted and the long-lasting trauma he had caused. D'Angelo sat silently in a wheelchair, showing no emotion. The judge sentenced him to multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would die in prison. The capture of the Golden State Killer is a landmark case. It demonstrates the incredible power of new technology and the unwavering dedication of law enforcement and citizen sleuths who refused to give up. It brought a long-overdue sense of closure to countless families, though the scars of his crimes will never fully fade. The story serves as a chilling reminder that evil can wear the most ordinary of faces, living just next door. But it's also a story of hope, a testament to the idea that no matter how much time has passed, the pursuit of justice never truly ends. Have you ever walked past a friendly-looking landscaper and thought nothing of it? In Toronto, for years, no one gave a second thought to a smiling, 60-something man named Bruce MacArthur. He was just the friendly gardener, the mall Santa, a familiar face in the city's vibrant gay village. But behind that harmless facade lurked a monster, one who would become Canada's most prolific known serial killer. This story begins not with a bang, but with a whisper, a growing unease that settled over Toronto's Church and Wellesley neighborhood. One by one, men started to disappear. Men like Skandaraj, Navaratnam, Majid, Kayon, and Abdulbasir Faizi. They were middle-aged, often immigrants from South Asia or the Middle East, with ties to the community but living on its fringes. Their disappearances were puzzling, leaving behind worried friends and families. But initially, police struggled to connect the dots. The community cried out, warning that a predator was in their midst. But for years, their fears were dismissed. They were told there was no evidence of a serial killer. Little did they know, the evidence was buried right under their feet. The investigation, codenamed Project Houston, was launched in 2012 to look into the disappearances of Faizi, Kayon, and Navarat. It was a complex and frustrating case. Leads went cold, and for a long time it seemed like the men had simply vanished into thin air. Years passed, the community's fear grew, but so did their frustration with the lack of answers. The list of the missing grew longer. Then, in the summer of 2017, another man, Andrew Kinsman, disappeared. Kinsman was different. He was a well-known and well-loved community activist. His disappearance was immediate and alarming. He wasn't someone who would just leave without a word. His friends and family launched a massive search, plastering his face on posters all over the city. This time, the police had a crucial clue. A single word written on Kinsman's calendar for the day he vanished. Bruce. This one name would unravel everything. Investigators began to focus on every Bruce connected to the victims. Their search eventually led them to Bruce MacArthur, the landscaper. He had a minor criminal record from years ago, but otherwise seemed ordinary. He ran a small landscaping business called Artistic Design. He had clients all over the city, wealthy homeowners who trusted him to beautify their properties. He was also active on dating apps, meeting men from the gay village. As police dug into MacArthur's life, a horrifying picture began to emerge. They discovered he had a history of violence that had been largely overlooked. More importantly, they found connections between him and several of the missing men. He had employed Majid Kayan. He had been in a relationship with Skandaraj Navaratnam. The pieces were falling into place, pointing directly at the smiling gardener. The police put MacArthur under surveillance. They watched his every move, gathering evidence, building their case. They knew they were dealing with someone incredibly dangerous and methodical. They couldn't afford to make a single mistake. The breakthrough came when they analyzed security footage from the area where Andrew Kinsman lived. They found a red Dodge Caravan, the same model MacArthur owned, near Kinsman's apartment building on the day he went missing. The tension was mounting. Police feared MacArthur might strike again. Their fears were confirmed when, through their surveillance, they realized he had brought another man to his apartment. Fearing for the man's life, they made a split-second decision. On January 18, 2018, they raided MacArthur's apartment. Inside, they found a man tied to the bed, unharmed but in imminent danger. They had stopped another murder just in time. The scene inside MacArthur's apartment was a house of horrors. Police found a cache of disturbing evidence. They discovered folders on his computer, each labeled with a victim's name. Inside were post-mortem photos of the men he had murdered. He had posed their bodies, often with a cigar in their mouths or draped in a fur coat he owned. It was a gruesome and ritualistic display. They also found a duffel bag containing a kill kit, duct tape, zip ties, a surgical glove, and rope. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. Where had he hidden the bodies? The answer lay with his landscaping business. MacArthur had access to dozens of properties across the Greater Toronto area. The police began a massive, painstaking search of the homes where he had worked. Their focus soon turned to a property on Mallory Crescent in a quiet, upscale neighborhood. Using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs, they started to excavate the backyard. What they found was beyond comprehension. Buried in large garden planters and in the ravine behind the house were the dismembered remains of his victims. For years, MacArthur had been using his clients' properties as a clandestine graveyard. The homeowners had no idea that a serial killer was tending their gardens while burying his dark secrets just inches away. The forensic work was immense. Piece by piece, investigators identified the remains. They belonged to Andrew Kinsman, Skandaraj Nafaratanam, Majid Kayan, Saraush Mahmoodi, Kirushna Kumar Kanagaratanam, Dean Lisowick, Salim Eason, and Abdulbasir Faizi, 8 men, all murdered by MacArthur between 2010 and 2017. He had preyed on men who were vulnerable, often new to Canada or struggling with personal issues, believing their disappearances would go unnoticed. The motive was chillingly simple: thrill and control. MacArthur lured his victims, many of whom he met through dating apps or in the gay village, with the promise of intimacy or work. Once he had them in his control, he would restrain and murder them, usually by strangulation. He then dismembered their bodies and took photographs as trophies, reliving his crimes over and over again. The mall Santa who brought smiles to children's faces was, in reality, a predator who took lives for his own sick pleasure. In 2019, Bruce MacArthur pleaded guilty to 8 counts of first-degree murder. The plea spared the families the agony of a long trial, but the pain and trauma he caused run deep. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years, meaning he will likely die behind bars. The case of Bruce MacArthur is a story of profound failure and incredible resilience. It exposed deep flaws in how police handled missing persons cases, particularly from marginalized communities. It highlighted how someone can hide in plain sight, using a friendly demeanor as a mask for unspeakable evil. But it also showed the strength of a community that refused to be silenced, that fought for justice for the men who were lost. Their voices, once dismissed, finally brought a monster to justice. It's a haunting reminder that the most dangerous predators are often the ones we least expect. Have you ever heard of Town? It's a quiet little town in South Australia, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and nothing much ever happens. Or so it seemed. Because, for a few horrifying years, this town became the backdrop for one of the most disturbing series of crimes in Australian history. This is the story of John Bunting and the Snowtown murders, a tale that proves evil can flourish in the most unexpected places. Our story begins in the early 1990s in a struggling suburb of Adelaide. This was a place hit hard by economic downturn, where unemployment was high and hope was low. It was here that a charismatic, friendly man named John Bunting moved in. He seemed like a great guy, a natural leader. He'd help his neighbors fix their cars, he'd give people advice, and he quickly became the center of a tight-knit group of friends. He presented himself as a protector, a man who looked out for the vulnerable and stood up against injustice. But underneath this friendly exterior was a darkness that no one could have imagined. Bunting had a very specific, twisted worldview. He despised certain groups of people. He believed the world was full of degenerates, and he saw himself as a righteous vigilante, tasked with cleansing society. He started to preach his hateful ideology to his new friends, a group of impressionable and marginalized men. He'd talk about justice, about taking matters into their own hands. And slowly, he began to groom them, testing their loyalty, pushing their boundaries, and drawing them into his web of hate. The first victim was a man Bunting had a personal grudge against. The murder was brutal, but it was just the beginning. It was a test. After it was done, Bunting and his inner circle felt powerful, invincible. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. This initial act set the stage for a spree of violence that would escalate in cruelty and depravity. Bunting's charisma was his most dangerous weapon. He was a master manipulator. He would identify a target, someone he deemed unworthy, and then he would begin a campaign of rumors and lies. He'd convince his followers that this person was a monster, a threat to their community, to their children. He was so convincing that his accomplices, men like Robert Wagner and James Vlasakis, started to believe him. They saw themselves not as murderers, but as soldiers in a secret war against evil. The group's methods were horrifyingly systematic. They would lure their victims to a house, often under the guise of friendship or offering help. Once inside, the nightmare would begin. The victims were subjected to unimaginable torture. Bunting seemed to revel in their suffering, often recording their last moments. He wanted to hear them confess to crimes they never committed, to validate his twisted sense of justice. He was a predator who enjoyed the hunt, the capture, and the slow, agonizing destruction of his prey. As the body count grew, the group faced a new problem: what to do with the remains. This is where the story takes an even more gruesome turn. They began dismembering the bodies and storing them in barrels. For a time, these barrels were moved from house to house, a macabre secret hidden in plain sight. Imagine your neighbor, the friendly guy who waves at you every morning, could have barrels filled with human remains sitting in his backyard. One of the most tragic aspects of this case is how the victims were chosen. They weren't random strangers. Many were friends, family members, or people from their own social circle. One of the victims was Vlasicus's own stepbrother. Bunting convinced Vlasicus that his stepbrother was a danger, manipulating the young man into participating in the murder of his own family. That's the level of psychological control Bunting had over his followers. He destroyed families from the inside out, turning brother against brother. The murders were also financially motivated. Bunting and his crew were committing social security fraud on a massive scale. After they murdered someone, they would continue to collect their welfare payments. They'd go to the bank, cash the checks, and use the money to fund their lifestyle. It was a cold, calculated operation. They were literally living off the ghosts of the people they had killed. The greed was just as much a motive as the hate. For years, they got away with it. People would go missing, but in a community where many lived transient lives, it didn't raise immediate alarm. The victims were often vulnerable individuals, people who wouldn't be missed right away. It was the perfect hunting ground for predators like Bunting. The police were investigating missing persons cases, but they hadn't yet connected the dots. They had no idea that a group of serial killers was operating right under their noses. The group's downfall began when they got careless. They needed a place to store the barrels, and they found a disused bank vault in the quiet town of It seemed like the perfect hiding spot. They moved the barrels into the vault, thinking their terrible secrets were safe forever. But they were wrong. In May 1999, police, acting on a tip-off from a concerned local, finally raided the old bank building. When they forced open the vault, they were met with a scene of unimaginable horror. Inside were 6 plastic barrels containing the dismembered remains of 8 victims. The smell was overpowering. The sight was something out of a nightmare. The discovery sent shockwaves across Australia and the world. The quiet town of Snowtown was now infamous, its name forever linked with this horrific case. The police investigation that followed was one of the largest in South Australian history. It was a complex web to untangle. They had the bodies, but they needed to connect them to the killers. The key breakthrough came when James Vlasicus, terrified and facing a lifetime in prison, agreed to cooperate. He became the star witness for the prosecution, and his testimony was crucial. He laid out the entire horrific saga, detailing each murder, the torture, the motives, and the man who was at the center of it all, John Bunting. The trial was a media sensation. The courtroom heard chilling details of the torture Bunting inflicted on his victims. They listened to the secret recordings Bunting had made, the sounds of people begging for their lives. The evidence was overwhelming. In the end, John Bunting was convicted of 11 murders. Robert Wagner was convicted of 10. They were sentenced to multiple life sentences with no possibility of parole. They will die in prison. Other members of the group received lesser sentences for their roles in the crimes. The Snowtown murders left a permanent scar on the Australian psyche. It shattered the illusion of safety in small-town life and revealed a capacity for evil that is difficult to comprehend. How could a man like John Bunting exist? How could he manipulate so many people into becoming monsters? These are questions that still haunt us today. The story serves as a chilling reminder that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes, it wears the friendly face of a neighbor. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as chilling as I did, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the darkest corners of true crime. Stay safe out there.